All right. Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome back to another Learning Tech Talks where we are continually exploring the landscape of learning technology while cutting through the fluff and answering your questions as we move into the digital age. See, I think I'm getting better at that intro there. So today I am joined by Oussama Labib, right? Did I get it right?
That's it. Well
All
done,
right.
Chris.
Yes, nailed it. All right. And he's with Aeqlia, right? There we go. I got that one too. Oh,
That's it. Two
goodness.
out
I'm
of
off to
two.
a strong start. And we're going to be talking about all sorts of exciting stuff. We're going to be talking about remote. We're going to be talking about gamification. We're going to be talking about a lot of different components, skill change, behavior change, but really ultimately when we dive down into the core of it, it's about accelerating team performance and what goes into that. And so you're going to see how we're going to thread all of that together and bring that together in a meaningful way. It's going to be a fun discussion like they are every week. But before we get into it, let's do some housekeeping stuff. If you aren't already, I would love to have you join me in the Learning Sharks community if you're not in there already. So come check it out, come hang out. We always have follow-up discussions on topics like this. So you can join me there. But then let's get into the warming up the waters a bit. We got to warm up the waters. People have to get to know. And do you prefer Ouss? Do you just typically go by Ouss?
Yeah, Ouss is perfect, Christopher.
All right. Well, then, so I will just call you Ouss for the sake of keeping it straight. So we will just warm up the waters because we don't really know Ouss. I know Ouss, but not everybody else knows Ouss. And so we got to let people know who you are. And this is also very engaging for everyone else because you can all play along. So if you're watching or listening, go ahead and comment in and share where you're in the world today. But Ouss, if people haven't seen it, it's pretty dark out that window right now. So if they haven't figured it out, you're not in the Midwest over here in the United States. So where are you?
No, I'm on the other side of the world, Christopher. I'm in Singapore. Yeah, so it's 11 p.m. Perfect time for Learning Tech Talk, Christopher. Thank you for that.
We talked about this before we went live. What else could you possibly be wanting to do on a Friday night at 11 o'clock other than being on a live stream with me talking about learning technology? I know that's what I would love to be doing tonight at 11. So you're brave for... So I appreciate you making it work, and this is going to be fun. We're going to have some fun. We're going to keep you wide awake. You're going to be wired by the time you get done and ready to get your night started. So I'm in Wisconsin, where I always am, here joined by Fred, my friendly houseplant. And now, the next question, it took you a little bit to get your answer to this. So I'm actually really curious where you go with it. But, and everybody, if you're brave and you want to share your story, please do in the comments. But Ouss, what is one of your most embarrassing childhood moments?
It took me a bit of time. I guess I kind of forget these kind of things, but I think I was anywhere between 13 to 14 years old, something like this. I had a play that I prepared with my school, and I was the kind of lead character.
You wrote it or you were in it?
No. I was playing this, right?
Okay, so you were in it. All right.
And so the time comes where, the curtains open and you go there and you have to open up and you forget everything. And you stare at, I don't know, it was like 75, 80 people that look at you and don't really understand what's going on. And you just stare until your teacher comes and tells you what to say. So that was really embarrassing. So I guess that's the worst from an embarrassing point of view, Christopher. Yeah.
So my follow-up question to you, though, then is, did you snap out of it? Did you snap out of that moment and then remember your lines, or did you just blank and walk off the stage?
I blanked, like a complete blank. And I remember the teacher came and gave me like the couple of first words to get me going. Nothing. So I just went out and someone else continued, and I don't think I came back again. So that was a complete failure. It wasn't like just a 30-second blank and then you go and you're amazing. It was just
This was like a legitimate. It's totally gone. It's not coming back. I'm calling it a day. I'm off stage. Yeah. I'm done. And the show went on. The show went on without.
That's it. Okay. And I remember, the freezing moments of you blank and you see everyone looking at you, and and you know you have to say something, but you can't, and you can't move. You're just completely frozen. Yeah.
Paralyzed. All right. Yeah, that's a pretty good one. And I can relate to that. I've had some of those in my adult life. So that's not just a kid thing. So mine's pretty embarrassing. So I was in, I want to say first or second grade. I was pretty young, really young. And I used to walk to school. I lived in a smaller town and I would walk to school, which was quite a distance. And anyway, as I'm walking to school, I have to go to the bathroom, and not number one, number two. I had to go, and there was no stopping this. And so I went behind a garage and just didn't think anything about it. I'm a little kid. I went and pulled up my pants and kept going and made it to school. Didn't think anything about it. And then in class, we're doing the Pledge of Allegiance. And the girl behind me is like, and she points at me and she's like, "Oh, there's poop on your back." So anyway, needless to say, it was probably one of the most traumatic and embarrassing moments of my childhood, because the entire class then the teacher kind of escorted me out. My dad had to come bring a new change of clothes. It was awful. It was absolutely awful. Needless to say, like a year later, it was bad. A year later, we moved and I got to go to a different school, and I never.
Good for you then.
Yes, I got away from that. So anyway, all right. Now that we've vetted all our embarrassing childhood stories, we can shift over to the conversation at hand, which really is more about team performance. Now, before we do, let's talk a little bit. So tell me a little bit about you, Ouss. What's your background? Have you always been in the learning space and the tech space? I mean, how did you end up coming up with Aeqlia?
I've been working in learning and development from the beginning. Now my career hasn't been so long. I'm 32 years old. I've been working in the L&D space for almost 10 years now. So I knew very early that I wanted to work in the HR L&D space. I've worked for Aeqlia in Singapore. I set up the L&D and talent function. I went on later on to do a bit of consulting. I wanted to see other industries. So I worked for a leading game-based learning company, working around coaching program, leadership development, culture transformation. I was the head of facilitation and instructional design. And then I started my company a year and a half ago. So that was a big move from a tech perspective. I've been using a lot of techs before as a facilitator, as a head of L&D, but never to the point that I had to build a learning platform and build a learning tech solution. So that's a little bit about me and my background. Yeah.
Okay. So you were in the practitioner space, and then you ended up. Now, did you have a technical background? Did you end up getting hooked up with some technical people who could actually design software?
I had no background, very little understanding of how it works. But the great thing is that one of my very, very good friend is a software developer. Another friend actually started his company. So I worked with them so that they could kind of develop the platform. But what I did have is a very thorough understanding of what needs to be developed from a 360.
You knew what you wanted. You knew what you wanted.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I knew what is required for the learner to have a good experience, for the facilitator to use the platform, for the head of L&D to administer and see the dashboard. So I guess the brief was really, really sharp, and I think that helped from a development perspective. What I didn't know is building the platform and writing the codes.
Okay. All right. So you knew what you wanted. You needed somebody technical, but it just so happened you had a friend in your back pocket who could do that.
That's it.
So let's talk about what Aeqlia is. So when people say, all right, what is this? Because on your website, it talks about remote team performance, virtual work, things like that. How do you summarize kind of the problem statement or what it is it's solving for?
What we do in one sentence, we accelerate team performance. We know that a lot of teams do not have a high level of team maturity or a level of performance that is satisfactory for the team leader, for the organization. We help them get to a higher level of performance. And we do that faster than it would normally take. So if you think about it, for a team to become fully performing, it might take you anywhere from 12 to 18 months. We can help teams together in 6 months. The way we do this is by creating team development journeys where we kind of take the best of all worlds. So we have a research partners that allow us to have a team assessment, diagnose the team needs, measure the team effectiveness. And we also have a thorough team development process that we can follow. We have game-based learning programs to make sure that we have a psychologically safe environment for teams to practice the behaviors of agile and high-performing teams. And at the back of it, we have monthly team coaching session content, so then we can move from awareness to behavior change for performance improvement. So when you put all of this together, you have 3 to 6 month team development journeys that are highly engaging, fun, using our game-based learning program, but at the same time deliver a return on investments, and we can measure the performance across the entire journey.
Okay. Now, are you? This is kind of a follow-up question to this. Are you primarily working with, say, an intact team? So maybe you're pulling together an existing team and say, hey, we're actually going to grow this. Or are you pulling people just from different teams and pulling them together? Or is it a mix?
It is a mix. So we use it for intact teams. We use it in leadership development programs as well. But the core of it is for intact teams. It's team members that have a common goal, that work together in the everyday at work. And that's a key difference between just using game-based learning program and doing what we do is we actually help them improve their performance back at work, not just in the game or in the experience. And for that to happen, they actually need to have something to work around together in their organization.
Okay, got it. So it makes sense in terms of, and we're going to talk about all this because if just to replay, and you tell me if I've got this right, if we replay this back in terms of how it worked, there's the assessment on the front end, which is you can't really know how to improve if you don't really know where you are today. So some of it is baselining. How is the team operating? How is it performing today? Where are the opportunities that lie? So making sure we do that piece. And then there's almost an experiential component. And that's what I really would love to, well, again, we're going to talk about all this. But then for over the next few months, you're actually keeping this intact team together, going through a series of experiences. It sounds like you said receiving some coaching along the way. So is it a combination then of asynchronous, synchronous? Like what's that makeup?
It is a combination. We engage the team members individually in an asynchronous way. So you have content, for instance, that will be given to the team members depending on what the team needs to work on, and then you have team coaching session. The main difference is that we're actually believing in the idea of collective intelligence. The whole team needs to take responsibility. We can't just work with a leader. We can't just work with a team member individually. It's the whole team that needs to take responsibility for it. So the team coaching session where everyone comes in is key to make sure that we can move from awareness to behavior change.
Okay. So with that, because I think there's a lot of things that we can go down this path. So I think in terms of the gist, hopefully anybody watching or listening gets kind of the gist of it. So there's a team assessment piece, and then there's this experience piece where they're working together on it. And I'm curious, when you talk about, and again, we'll dive into some of the components because I like where we had talked before about how we're going to break this down, because you can do these things independently and not necessarily have it do anything. But I'm curious just your take on this, because when it comes to taking a team through an experience, what's your take on, is it a shared experience that is something that they're actually dealing with? Like, are they working through a real problem at work? Or is it a simulation? Because you talked about kind of creating a safe space for failure. And if so, how are you getting that balance right? Because I've seen it swing in two different directions where it's completely unrelated to their work and you're almost kind of trying to get them to put a man on the moon or something like that, put a person on the moon. Other times it's super hyper focused on, you got to bring your problem to work or to this simulation and solve it. Where are you on that spectrum?
The experience itself is going through an experience, going through an island. So we really take you out of the workplace, but we do that with intentionality. The main reason is what we've seen, and I've been working for quite a few number of years with business simulation, game-based learning. What I know and what I've noticed is that when you take people in a business simulation that is too close to the workplace, what you will get is the kind of adapted behavior. But the reality is that when you work with senior managers, senior leaders, from a knowledge perspective, they know what they need to do. When they are in the workplace, everyone is really careful, right? So it's very difficult because you can't really debrief the kind of pressure situation or crisis situation that might happen in work. So by taking them in a fictional environment, what we get to see is a default behavior. If you can allow me to share one story, I've done it with a team of C-level executives that start the game with their arms crossed like this, a little bit like a game. It's not, I'm too good for this. 5 minutes in the experience, they are kids. They're competing with everyone. They're talking over everyone else. Like they forget everything that they should be knowing. And then you get the actual behaviors. And that's great from a kind of coaching perspective because it allows you as a coach, as a facilitator, to debrief the behaviors that you've observed versus theoretical situation that might have happened in the workplace. If I can just add one more thing. The first question we ask when we do the debrief, because we let teams kind of play the game and they have to make collective decisions in the experience. And after that, you have a facilitated discussion of an hour and a half at least, so that they can understand what happened in the experience, what are the learnings, how can they apply the learnings back into the workplace. The first question we ask teams is, have you ever played Mickey Island before, which is the name of our experience? And they all say no. And then we say, but are you sure? Because you told us it's about collaboration. You told us it's about making agile decisions. And I promise you, they all tell you, actually, we play Mickey Island every single day. So one of the key difference is the level of learning design that goes into the experience. Is it just kind of a game, or is it something that reflects the challenges that the team are facing in their everyday at work? And I think that's a key difference.
No, well, and again, you're going to find in the conversation, we're going to be going back and forth like this. That's the whole point of it. But I think what you hit on there is important for any practitioner in general to consider on this space, because your point about the intentionality behind it is really true. Now, in the experience that you mentioned where the simulation's too close to work or maybe a previous existing work situation, my experience has been, I find that people either get too hung up on well, that isn't exactly how it happened, or they get hung up on weird details. You're like, okay, you're missing the forest through the trees right now. You're focusing on, well, that didn't happen in Chicago. That actually happened in Michigan. You're like, okay, forget that. So I agree that kind of almost ripping them out of that is important to actually do this. But your point about the intentionality is such a key component, because if you just do it and do this make-believe land, two things can happen. One, you may not actually be tying it to the actual behaviors that matter, which then your analysis and your movements like, well, what's the point? So they beat the game, they got out of the escape room, but did they actually use the behaviors we were trying to do? But two, the other thing is, to that point of those, executives all grouchy about the experience, if there's not at least, if you're not, and it sounds like that's what you're doing, is if you're not able to at least tell the story of this may seem abstract, but it's not. I think that you can lose people. If they feel like it's really too abstract and they're like, I just don't even get it, then it feels like a waste of time. And it sounds like you're really making sure that you're painting that picture and getting it in between.
No, you're absolutely right. You can even take it one step further, that if you have to make a point to explain why the experience translates to the everyday work, then maybe the experience is not even good enough. People should, no, but that's the reality. Like if you have a coaching approach, then like when we do facilitated debrief, we only have a few questions. I mean, more than a few, but we have questions. People get to where we want to get them to by themselves. Then they take ownership of the whole responsibility and their developments. But this depends on how well the experience has been designed. And I think where where we have a kind of a competitive advantage or something that is different is we have this research partner that we developed the experience with. And we started with the behaviors. So this research partner has characteristics of high-performing team, what they call stage 4 teams. And we know that stage 4 teams will have common goals, clarity of roles, the ability to kind of stop and reflect along the way. So we started by defining these are the behaviors that can make you kind of win in the experience. And then you build the experience at the back of it. You don't just take something, make it a little bit fun and put it and say, here it is, a training program. And so because we've done, I want to hope like the right way of designing it, then at the end of it, when participants get to it, they tell themselves, yeah, this is what we face every day. And they know, and this is something beautiful every time I work with teams, like 80% of the time, they know what they should be doing. Like you're not really here to tell them all of this.
It's not a knowledge gap. It's rarely a knowledge gap in that.
It's not.
No, and I think your point about the design of this is, again, I think some of these lessons are relevant for anybody in the field, regardless of where you're at. It's easy sometimes to jump to the what do we want to do first, right? Like we're gonna make a leadership experience. We're gonna build a game, and then we build the game, and then we're like, okay, now we've got it built. What is it that we can get people to take from this? And it's like, well, you got to reverse that. And I think your point of that, of figuring out, okay, what are the dynamics of a high performing team? What are those behaviors? What are those skills we need to focus on? Now that we have that, how do we actually build something that models and develops that? That's how we should be doing it. And I think we talk a lot in the industry about outcome first, like focus on the outcomes. But I don't know that we always do the best job of actually executing against that.
No, and maybe we don't always do the best job of defining it. There's so many buzzwords, and you can go on our website and you will see those buzzwords. But like agility and high performance and collaboration and growth mindset, and these are great things. But what exactly does it mean on a behavioral level? If you're not able to define it first for yourself as a practitioner, there's no way you can help others get there. And there is a key. I mean, everyone kind of now is familiar with this idea of like behaviors will drive the results that you want. Is like you don't get more sales by just telling your salespeople sell more. You tell them this is the behavior you need to change. You need to build relationship early with your accounts. Then you will get the result that you want. And you can follow the same step, but we kind of jump very often in the how do we do it, and not enough in the let's define it on a behavioral level first. Because this is something very tangible that you can measure and also observe and coach people on.
Well, and I think one of the risks on that piece is there's some nuance to that focusing on the outcomes. And this is where I think sometimes it's a bit of a sidestep that actually has some serious consequences, because we can say, well, we are focused on the outcome. We're going to design a learning experience that's going to change behavior. And it's like, well, that's an outcome, but you still got to go back even one more step and say, okay, but what behave, like, let's define that first, not just say, we're going to build a learning experience for teams. Okay, well, that's not the outcome really that you start with. You start with the outcome of what's going on with teams. Where is it breaking down? Okay, now we've figured that out. Now let's let that define what we need to do to solve it. So I think that's where we can sometimes get mistaken to think we are designing for outcomes, but we're not.
No, and or we're not doing it in the right way so that you get the results that you can get for your teams. I mean, one great example, we work with a lot of organization in the context of digital transformation and agility. And what has happened is a lot of organizations have started a journey. I mean, everyone is an agile organization if you listen to them now, but a lot of things have happened from a process and tools perspective. And the best example I have is I went and started to do some development coaching with a software development company. And I get there and I get a discovery kind of call with the team. And I get this 12-page document of their agile manifesto. And when I get into the first kind of coaching conversation with them, I tell them, look, if this is what you are doing, you need to train me. I don't need to be there. But the reality is that they have the processes, they have the tools, they actually don't have the behaviors in their daily or weekly team meetings. So how can we help them get there? How can we help them, for instance, revisit the goal very often, clarify the roles, take the opportunity to stop and reflect along the way? But this is just one example, for instance, of how you can move from a very specific behavior to an outcome that you can deliver for the organization or for the team that you're working with.
Well, and I laughed when you first started going down that path, just because you said, well, now like everyone's an agile organization. And it's funny because it's easy to say, and that's kind of what we're talking about here, is it's easy to say, even in learning and development, it's easy to say, yeah, we're focused on outcomes, we're changing behaviors. And it's like, but are you doing it? Because just to your point, you have a 13-page manifesto that says we are this, but is that translating into the actual actions and behaviors of the organization, or is it a poster on the wall that really doesn't fit? So actually, I want to shift to this assessment piece. Let's talk a little bit about this, because when it comes to assessing team performance, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how you're actually digging into that. Like, how are you actually determining what a team's assessment is at an actionable level? Because it's easy to look at a team and go, yeah, we're dysfunctional, or this isn't working right at this surface level, but to actually dig into the vertical and go, yeah, but what is breaking down? What is going wrong? That's a different state.
Yeah. From that perspective, everything that we have is based on or is done together with our research partner. They're a research company. They have been doing research and development around high-performing team for the past 30 years. They have a framework that explains that necessarily for you to become a high-performing team, you will go through 4 stages. You will go through stage 1, which is dependency and inclusion, then counter-dependency and fighting, then trust and structure, then work and productivity. And for each of these stages, there are some clearly defined behaviors and characteristics of what a stage 1, 2, 3, and 4 is. Now, what they've been able to do and iterate on for the past 30 years is a team assessment where everyone from the team will answer a list of 60 questions. And depending on the answer, they can aggregate the data and tell you what is your team effectiveness, 60, 70, 80%, what is your productivity ratio, but even more importantly, what is your group maturity level? Are you a stage 1, stage 2, stage 3 teams? And then take it one step even further, which is now if you are a stage 2 team, these are the things that you need to work on so then you can move to the next steps. And that's really the basis of everything that we're doing. Because that allows us to personalize the team development journey, but also to measure it at the end of the day. So our clients can hold us accountable. You can take the same assessment at the end and you see whether the team has shifted their performance or not.
Okay. Well, and the framework of that, and actually I have a funny question to ask because I'm really curious on this one. But before I do, that point of, a lot of times we get into these conversations and it's easy for people to say, well, we can't really measure behavior change. And to that, I would say, I don't agree with that. I've done it many times over the years where to this point, if you actually get to the root of what are the behaviors that good, like how do we define good, not so good, and bad? And we can actually say, this is what those look like. And you can do a pre-assessment and a post-assessment. You actually can start to see, well, did we actually shift behavior? But I'm curious on this one, because I can think of a very specific situation over the years where, let's just say that the team wasn't honest in their pre-assessment. Okay, they weren't honest in it, and this is where I think the experiential piece is so important to team development, because you can say it's great, we're working together. Like, and I remember a specific instance where it came back like we're stage 4, we're knocking it out of the park, and we put them in a simulation. And let's just say they weren't at stage 4 by any definition. So I'm curious if you ever see this where these results and people are like, we're crushing it. And then they go into it and it's like, yeah, this is like a kindergarten soccer team right now.
We haven't seen that. There's a bit of distinction. I don't think we had people that answered it in the way that you're sharing, Christopher. Let's put it like this. But I think that the very interesting thing though is, when we work with stage 2 teams that are counter-dependent in fighting, put it simply, it's people that are pushing back on the team leaders, pushing back on the other team members, not clear about the goal, the roles. They get into Mickey Island experience, they have the exact same challenges. But here's one of the big value of the experiential learning is we let them kind of play the experience first. Naturally, they will not perform. Sometimes they will even die in the experience. That's all right. It's learning, right? We hold a very quick kind of facilitated debrief where you help them change the behaviors, right? And you let them identify what is it that they need to work on. They get to play the experience again, and they will see that the performance improves. So what it does is that there is a direct correlation that they can see between changing their behaviors and a higher performance in the experience. And they also start to see what it feels like to be in a high-performing team. So suddenly they have something, a common experience that they can build upon so that they can move forward when they go back in the workplace.
Okay. Well, and that's an important point of clarification that I think also is important as you consider any sort of skill development, but especially in team behavior, is this point of, yes, you can have this traditional assessment, but then from what it sounds like, they're also then getting put into the experience to be like, let's see how you actually perform. So there is almost this, there's this traditional assessment and this experiential assessment that kind of lets you level set and go, so, hey, how do you really think you're doing right now? Let's take a look at these areas of opportunity in that.
Yeah. And so what we talk a lot about is this idea of kind of instant learnification. So you're familiar with instant gratification, and I'm a Gen Y somehow.
Is that what you said?
Yeah, we came up with it, so that's why you never heard that before. But it's like I need it now. When I go for training program myself, I don't want to know that I'm going to change behaviors in 6 months. That's the painful process, but I don't want that. I want to be able to know tomorrow, am I doing the right thing? I need it now. So this is the idea of instant learnification. Now, when you kind of let people experience or have a game-based learning program or an experiential learning, you kind of give them on the spot the idea of how well they're performing. Now, it's not back at work, but if your experience is really aligned with how they're working in the workplace, they can get it. So if you perform well, you have a high score. If you don't, then you kind of die in the experience. But this idea of instant learnification measured by the assessment, that's what we're trying to achieve.
I can't hold back the smile because I love the instant learnification. We said we were learners in the post leading up to this. So like, there you go. We can create our own vernacular here on that. But I like what you're getting at, which is, and I think this is one of the things that, I did a poll recently from people about what their attitude is when they see something's mandatory training. And what was interesting about it, the point isn't to talk about mandatory training, but the point is, what was interesting about the response was a large majority of people had an attitude of curiosity at first, which was a bit unexpected even to me. But the reality is that instant learnification is an important point, because when people first engage in this stuff, there is this curiosity, this, I kind of want to get into it. Mm-hmm. But if that's met with, right, if it's like, oh, well, this isn't going anywhere anytime soon, that's where you lose people. And then even if you have a really great experience, they may never actually get to that point because now their attitude, they've checked out mentally, all these things. So I like instant learnification, but I think not just because it's a cool, catchy phrase that I'm going to add to my vernacular, but also the fact that it's true that if you're not giving somebody something of value very quickly, you're going to lose them to other distractions.
That on top of letting them experience, because the reality is that how many, and I'm pretty sure you can do this exercise and you've done that before, how many true high-performing team have you been a part of? I know that personally, some of the teams that I led and some of the teams that I was on were not really high-performing. I can remember one or two, but a lot of people might not even get there. And if you don't know what you don't know, if you're not part of a high-performing team, how are you going to get there at the end? So this kind of instant learnification, as well as the idea that we let them experience what it's like, the feeling of pride and achieving the results and having a higher performance, doing the kind of right thing, or at least demonstrating the behaviors of high performing team, you experience it. So then when you go back to work 3 months later, you kind of know whether you're doing it or not because you have a benchmark. And the other big element of experiential learning is, and we can talk about the kind of learning decay, people forget up to 90% or whatever the number is after 30 days. You go through an experience when it's well designed, you remember it for a year, 2 years, 5 years, because it's really different and it gets you emotionally connected to the experience. So 6 months later, you're in a team that's not performing, you will kind of build this idea of common language. You can reference back to the experience that you had with the team to adjust your behavior and change your performance.
Okay. So two things on that I want to kind of flesh out a little bit more, because I think they're really worth calling out on that. So the first one is this point of, there are probably a lot of people who have not actually experienced what it is to be on a high performing team. I mean, that I think can't be understated, because really, if you think about it, it's, and I joke about it, but it's kind of not really a joke either in L&D, is sometimes it's easy to have a Stockholm syndrome of things where it's like, well, you don't know what you don't know. And so this fear of this thing that's outside of this actually prevents you from ever getting there, because you're like, at least this is the dysfunction I know. Like, this team dysfunction is at least familiar to me, and I'd rather deal with a dysfunctional team I know than go into this world of high performance that I don't know. And what if I don't actually like it, and it actually seems a little bit intimidating? So being able to actually give people a flavor of that, because the reality is, like many things, once you experience that, you don't want to go back to it.
You can't. You can't.
You just
can't
can't
go back. That's it.
No, you can't. You can't. Yeah. So
and I know that's really interesting what you're saying, and I think it's the same thing in a way with the experience itself. Is that once you start experiencing a good game-based learning program, a good one, then it's very difficult to go back to the kind of old ways of training. Today, you go on Zoom and you have someone talking to you for like 2 or 3 hours, and it's going to be a little bit boring. And you remember what you did like 3 months ago around this, and this level of energy and engagement, that almost like face-to-face feeling that you can kind of recreate. It's something that a lot of organizations and teams that we work with face somehow. Yeah. The other thing to build on, just to build on what you were sharing, is you don't know what it's like to be part of a high performing team as a team member. One of the biggest challenge I had when I led teams very early on in my career is I didn't know what to do to build a high performing team. I knew my team was not performing. I didn't have the knowledge that I have now, because I'm a certified coach, to build the team, to get them to level or stage 4. And unless you have a big budget and you can work with sometimes expensive certified coach, it's not democratized. Like, it's really interesting to look at it, because individual coaching has shifted for the past few years. You have like companies like BetterUp that are doing amazing job to democratize individual coaching. Now, how are we working with teams? How are we scaling up team development in organization?
Yep. No, and I think that's an important point, where it's not, and I think this is, I get into this discussion on a fairly regular basis, where I'll run into this whole, well, which areas should we be focusing on? And my answer to that is, I mean, all of them. You might have to prioritize where you're going, because again, you can have, even if you democratize coaching and people are getting much better individual coaching, there's a difference between being coached and then going and doing it and then coming back versus actually being coached in that moment with that group of people through that experience. And that level of democratization, you just can't get that. And so I think that's an important point, where it's not saying this replaces coaching, no, but does this actually give you an opportunity in a team environment to actually work with a team through this in, to your point, a simulated safe environment, where it's like, well, we know where you need to get, we know how to do this, so that you can fail, you can learn, you can do these things and get feedback along the way and pick up from that. Because like you said, there's a lot of leaders, they look around and they go, I know something's broken, I know it's not working right, I just don't necessarily know what to do about it.
Yeah. No, and the role of technology, I know it is a bit scary sometimes for coaches because we think that with all of this learning tech platforms that exist, like we're going to disappear. I don't think the question is there a place, because the way I look at it, there will always be a need for a coach to be there. But do you need to be there 100% of the time, or can you be there at specific point only? And what I think technology allows us to do, whether it's with the game-based learning that is digital and remote, but even more with the team assessment, is that it can allow you to personalize the team development journey at scale. Because suddenly you can use the same. I talk a lot about Lego blocks. Like we have these Lego blocks that we can pull in, right? Depending on the team that we work with. So it's not like this is the team development journey and everyone needs to go through it, because depending on your team, you need different things. But if you start with the right diagnosis, and then it helps you personalize the journey, you can use the experience, and your team brings their own behaviors in the experience, and you coach them later on, you can start to scale it and really help teams to improve the performance. And when you do that with an organization at scale, what clients really enjoy is that they're at the push of a button away to know the team effectiveness of their team in the entire organization. So it's no longer, oh, Chris, you think this team is not working well. Let's look at the framework that we have. Yeah. Let's look at the diagnostic. And you build this kind of common language in the organization.
Yeah. Well, and there's two things that, as you talked about that kind of jumped out, is, when it comes to these components, and now I totally blanked on what it is. So we're going to see. It's kind of like your childhood moment from this, from your childhood. I literally just went, I'm like, oh, these are these two takeaways from what you just said that just jumped out on that. And now I lost. Oh, no. I remember. Okay. I at least remember one of them. So we'll just go with it. One is, this gets back to that debate though of scalability, because I think it's easy to sometimes get too caught up on we have to custom design something for each team. And it's like, no, you don't, because to your point, the general experiences, and this is the whole point going back to defining what does good team performance look like, is that's universal. That's a universal thing. The personalization naturally comes out when you take a different team and you put them through the same experience and go, well, your learnings, the lessons you take from this, those are 100%. That's like DNA. That's going to be 100% unique to you, but we don't need to custom design everything for that individual team, because the experience is still the same.
No, what you might be looking at, and what you might need instead, is a learning design, a learning process that's flexible enough to adapt based on the team that you're working with. And if the technology can allow you to do this, then you can scale. Then you get the value that you want for the team that you're working with. If you have to do that as an individual, as an L&D team, that there's no way you can do that when you're working with hundreds and thousands of teams in your organization.
No, and that's just it. You can do it. You can do it on small scale, but as you start getting into big global distributed companies, it's just not possible. If you've got a team of 5 and you're a company of 5, well, that's a different story. But when you start talking about big it's just not scalable. So let me actually shift gears, because gamification. All right, let's tackle this one, because that term has a very different response from people depending on who you talk to. Because you might say, hey, gamification, and some people pop a confetti cannon, and other people go, oh, I hate, right? Gamification's the worst. And I personally think that's largely because of how we've seen it used poorly. And it can be used really well. It can be used really poorly. But so let's talk about this, because to your point earlier, you mentioned, some people might come in arms crossed going like, game? I'm past this. I'm an adult. I don't play games anymore, type of a thing. And it's like, well, actually done right, this is power. So let's talk about what that game experience is like.
No, sure. I think I'm gonna share quickly, because I think it can help everyone to visualize what it's look like. Before I go there, there is a difference first between gamification and game-based learning. What we're not doing is gamification. We're not doing gamification. To put it simply, the way I like to explain it, and I'm happy to hear your thoughts as well, Christopher, on this, but gamification is this idea of leaderboards, getting points. So you watch 10 videos, you'll get 20 points, and then you can compete with others, and maybe you get a voucher at the end. So this idea of incentivizing the learning process to get points. That's gamification for me. That's not what we do. There's pros and cons around this. What we do is game-based learning. It's the idea that we tell you a story, and the story is your team has been doing amazing. They're going to get rewarded with a 3-day, 2-night retreat to Hawaii. You're getting on the plane, you're flying over the Pacific Ocean, and your team is going to crash on Mickey Island. Now, what could have been a great 3-day, 2-night retreat in Hawaii is going to transform into a survivor journey. And then you get the teams to kind of play the game for an hour and a half. And let me just share maybe the
and while you're pulling that up, that is a really important distinction to make. And I do think the term gamification does get thrown around a lot. And there is that distinction between gamification, where you're taking game elements and sprinkling it in kind of, here and there, like a leaderboard, like badges, like points, things like that, versus game-based learning, which is we're actually mapping and architecting an experience around game design. We're actually using game design to design the experience, to say, well, let's use the psychology behind that to actually drive the experience. So it's an important distinction, and I do think it's worth noting that there's a difference, and what we're talking about is game-based learning. So let me pull it into the feed here. Okay, so this is an island that people say they've never played before, but they actually play it every day.
That's it, and I think if this is the only thing you remember, Christopher, I'll be happy with this. But this is the platform that you can use. It's actually you can start the game. You can do some learning activities as well. We have some behavioral analytics and a bit of content. But when you kind of start the game, this is after understanding the story. You'll just get to select your character, and you decide with your team who's doing what. And you have different roles. You have an adventurer, you have a strategist with a clear line of sight toward the goal, data scientist working through all of the information. So what we've done is we've kind of replicated the roles in a standard team. And on top of that, we've done and reflected the challenge of asymmetry of information, as in everyone has a very specific profile information sheet. And so it forces people to collaborate effectively in their breakout rooms, for instance, so then they can make effective decisions together in the experience. All of this is updated. So again, like if you were in my team right now.
This was going to be one of my questions on this is, so you've got, let's say in this example, you got 5 people.
That's it.
Are they collaborating on Zoom, and then this is something separate that they're kind of, because I can see it's obviously intelligent enough to know that if you pick this role, so and so on your team can't also pick this role as well. It's you can each kind of take one.
No, that's absolutely this, Christopher. So if you take one role, someone else in your team will not be able to take your own role. They will take another one. Then when everyone gets into the waiting room, so you kind of create teams before in the session, and use any video conference system that you want, whether it's Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. And then you get to this. So as you can see, it's kind of from a gameplay perspective, it's very simple. You have a timer, so it's going to take you 1 hour. You have to move from the plane crash location here to the location 53, where you can get the board and escape before day 29. All of this is interactive, so you'll get to manage food and water. So that's the idea of managing resources along the way. You have a stop and reflect, because we know that sometimes teams are feeling chaotic throughout the process. So they can use the stop and reflect.
That never happens. What are you talking about?
But using the stop and reflect, you get like 5 minutes. You can use it 3 times. And we give you some question that can help you improve your performance. And these questions are based on the research. So like the first set of questions help you move from stage 1 to stage 2. If you do it again, it will help you move from stage 2 to stage 3. You start to have questions around conflict, for instance. So this is the idea of how can we show the accelerated
This is all intentionally, like you can only hit the red button 3 times is what
That's
you said, right? So it's like you got to use your resources. And again, as a team, you're working together to say, okay, how are we going to do this to make it through?
Yeah, and what's really funny is that you get, like from a gameplay perspective, it's very simple. From an intellectual perspective, decision-making process perspective, this is where it's highly challenging, because people, out of 5 people, you have 2 that want to go north, 1 that want to go south. They always disagree on the number of food and water. They don't have a clear goal. They have to readjust the strategy and tactics. Like the landscape of the island will change. So you will naturally have to adjust your strategy and tactics. And so you let them play for 60 minutes. They might take 30 minutes, 45 minutes, depending on how well they kind of collaborate together. And depending on their performance. If I heard you
right, again, I'm going to keep jumping in. And if I heard you right, they can die. So like there's no guarantee you get to the end either. Failure is an option.
It is an option. I'm going to even put it a little bit more than this. Because of the complexity of the design of this program, it's very, very difficult for a team to have a high performance the very first time. I think that happens maybe less than 5% of the time that team achieve a stage 4 or a high level of performance in the experience. And we do have...
So the first time people do it, most of the time they don't make it to the end.
I wouldn't say that. I think you might have 15% of the team, 15-20% of the team that kind of die. But
a majority of the time, 85%.
15%. I say.
No, 85% you don't make it, right?
No, sorry. So let me rephrase. 85% of the time you will make it. You will make it to the
even on the
to
first
the marine
time?
base. Right. Even on the first time. But then the thing is, the question is, what does it mean to make it? Because you have 29 days. You might get there by day 28. You might get there by day 16. So even if you get there by day 26, you might only have an average performance. Then the question becomes, how can you get there by day 24, 20, 16?
Okay. And this gets back to there's really multiple objectives that you're trying to do, which again goes back to these team behaviors where it's, you might get to the end, but just because you got to the end doesn't mean that you're a high-performing team. You may get to the end, and in fact, you blew it. I mean, it was not a successful completion.
Yeah, and then so just to build on this, once they have kind of played Mickey Allen, then they get to take the GDQ, the team assessment that we spoke about. And when they answer it, then they get to see this report. So they get to see the 4 stages. And as you can see, you have very specific behaviors for each of the 4 stages, some development tasks, and then they get to see their results. So this team, for instance, we saw that they had an effectiveness ratio of 80% or 81% in Mickey Island, and that they were stage 3 in Mickey Island. So that starts to kind of introduce... So they play the
game first before they do the assessment?
So this is the short version of the assessment, which we take just after the kind of game to reflect on their behaviors. But then you can take the long version to debrief and assess how they're working in the workplace.
Okay, got it.
And so that's basically how we're using the whole experience, Christopher.
Got it. No, and I think being able to see how those things come together, but this isn't something you just do one day, if I'm hearing you right, because, so it's an hour, but you don't do this once and then you say, hey, that was a really great team building exercise, let's move on, correct? This is something that you're doing over time?
Yeah, so it's more that the development process is done over time. So you might start with Mickey Island, for instance, in the first engagement, but you're going to start coaching them on how they can improve the performance back at work. So the second time you meet them, we're going to start talking about how they can apply the learnings from Mickey Island back at work. So for instance, they will see that in Mickey Island, they didn't manage to solve conflict in an effective way. And maybe that's something that they're facing at work. So how can they use their common experience in Mickey Island to start solving conflict in a better way in their work? And then you can meet a month later, see how they've done that, what is the next development stage of the team, and just help them and coach them through the development process.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about this, and this is something that, you'll get into the whole, you said it earlier, where remote virtual experiences can actually be as close to as good as in person. And as far as I'm concerned, I actually think the potential power and capability for change is actually even better, because to your point of doing this, and I've done some of these in person before, where you bring people together and they do a game like this and they maybe have some cool insight aha moments, but you've only been able to pull them together the one time in person, and then they go back and it's over. They forget about it a week later, that, it was kind of fun, but I didn't really do anything. where by making this digital and accessible regardless of where people are, you can now space that experience out over time and say, well, now this isn't just something that you do once and you had a good time and it filled a slot on your agenda and then everybody goes back to work. This now becomes an intentional focus area to say, we're focusing on team performance, and that takes time and effort.
No, you're right, and that's the key thing. It's intentionality. You mentioned this. Is where does that fit in the bigger picture of the learning and development process? Because it's not about a one-off event. Whether it's game-based learning or anything else, you don't change behavior like this. Like you need to work through times and repeat, and you need to have the right level of content at the right time and in the right level of engagement. And only when you're able to pull all of these pieces, those Lego blocks together, then you have a true shot at changing behavior for performance improvements.
Okay, so one last question, and then I knew we were going to run out of time, but one last question. It comes from Angela, and I'm going to take your question, Angela, and apply it in a slightly different way, because she had asked, is that red button kind of like call a friend? Which what I'm seeing is it pulls up some thoughtful questions to help the team kind of think about it. But I guess that leads me to the follow-up question, which may actually get to what Angela's asking about, which is, what is the role of the Aeqlia team in terms of this kind of coaching and involvement in the process? Because it's one thing to say, hey, here's this game, you're going to get some insights in a report, but it's kind of on you to figure this out, versus what's your role in actually helping drive that performance along the way?
Yeah. So what we recommend as facilitators, as coaches from the Aeqlia team, is not to interact with the team throughout the whole experience. And there's a reason for this, because if you give and if you provide advice to the team and they succeed, they might be thinking that this is because you helped them. And if they don't, they might put the blame on you. So they cannot take responsibility for the outcome. And this is the number one thing that we need to do from a behavior change perspective. Our responsibility is to make sure that we are there, we can observe the behaviors, because the real and the value happens in the debrief, the next part of the session, which is we're going to talk about what happened and I'm going to ask you a question, but I can also share some of the observation, some of the behaviors that I've seen, and I can help you identify what you can do differently. So what we're really trying to do is not just improve performance, but build this kind of self-organized teams. Because unless you do this,
culture of accountability in some regards,
that's it.
You're saying that, right? Yeah. Like it's,
and then because you can't build sustainable performance otherwise. Like they might get better for 6 months with you, and then you disappear and they don't change. What we want to deliver is helping them on the process, so then it can continue to bear fruit after a year or 2 years, because they understand how to do that.
Okay. And so if I'm understanding that right, then the role you're playing in this is, hey, when you're doing this thing, we're not messing with you, because if we come in and give you tips and help and do, it's not going to force you as a team to learn how to improve and get better at it. But there is intentional debrief points where you're saying, hey, here's some observations from us as we were seeing how you performed. Correct?
That's it. The most simplest way to say it is we put them in an environment in which the outcome is 100% depending on them. We're not tricking them. They have all the information they need. Whether they can use the information, whether they can make the right decision, that's 100% on them. And this will define whether they can have a performance in Mickey Island or not. So it's not a trick kind of game. And that's why you have teams that perform really highly and some that don't. But that's because of how well they can collaborate together.
Okay. Well, and I think sometimes that's an area, and then I'll wrap on this, where we can be afraid to do this, is to say, we're just going to kind of let you do this. And we've given you all the tools, but you've got to we can't always be here to pick up the pieces and do that. So I think, and her comment back is, so you can learn your patterns and learn to self-regulate to overcome this. And that's just it. The goal is to teach you how to build ongoing, sustainable, high-performing teams, because the reality is teams come together, they break apart, you join new teams, and if you only know how to do it, it reminds me of back when I taught math. If people only know how to solve this one equation, they get stuck when another equation, even if it's the same structure, hits. And the goal is to say, now you can take what you learned and apply it. Okay. All right. Well, Ouss, I knew we were going to run out of time. I knew it.
I knew.
But this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you staying up. What? It's midnight now. Is it like
It is now.
almost midnight?
It is midnight.
You know what? It's Saturday. Happy Saturday, Ouss.
Thank you, Chris.
Well, this has been great. Thanks everybody for joining. I really enjoyed the time and the conversation. Thanks for telling us a little bit more about it. And again, if anybody has questions, feel free to reach out to me or Ouss directly, and have a wonderful rest of your weekend because you're already well into it.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you for having us today.
All right. Have a good one.